June 1941, Halfaya Pass, North Africa. The Italian soldier stared at the steaming plate before him, unable to comprehend what his eyes witnessed. After weeks of desert fighting, subsisting on hard biscuits and occasional pasta rations, the aromatic feast laid before him by British captors seemed an impossible mirage. The meat, actual beef, glistened with rich gravy. Beside it sat golden brown potatoes, roasted to perfection, and vibrant green vegetables that had not come from a tin. Most bewildering was the strange puffy bread, risen dramatically above the plate's rim like a golden crown. "Sunday roast," the British sergeant explained simply, gesturing for him to eat. "Yorkshire pudding there. Bit of tradition." The casual offering of this feast to a captured enemy contradicted everything fascist propaganda had prepared him to expect in British hands. Across the North African campaign that summer, 415,162 Italian soldiers would encounter a reality that systematically dismantled fascist mythology about British brutality and scarcity. They discovered a military that, despite fighting desperately for survival, maintained civilized traditions like Sunday dinners. They encountered troops who shared tea with milk and sugar, who offered cigarettes freely, who treated prisoners with a dignity that Mussolini's speeches had declared impossible from the barbaric British. These simple meals, dishes that Italian soldiers recognized as requiring substantial resources and preparation time, would effectively demolish fascist ideology more efficiently than any counter-propaganda campaign. The evidence of British humanity was being written in gravy and roast beef, in tea and pudding, revealing a British character that rendered Italian deprivation not noble patriotism, but unnecessary suffering. What began as astonishment at British civility would evolve into complete psychological reorientation. The Desert War's turning point. The British offensive during Operation Compass in December 1940 through February 1941 resulted in the capture of approximately 130,000 Italian troops. These soldiers, many from Italy's 10th Army who had endured months of desert hardship, expected harsh retaliation following surrender. Fascist propaganda had conditioned them to anticipate starvation and mistreatment from British savages who would sooner feed dogs than Italian prisoners. Instead, within hours of surrender, they encountered British Army rations. Standard British Army field provisions, which British soldiers routinely grumbled about, contained treasures to Italian prisoners: tea with condensed milk, tinned beef, jam, hard biscuits, cheese, and cigarettes. Italian soldiers who had survived on insufficient rations for months treated these everyday British meals as luxuries. According to British military records, at processing camps in North Africa, British quartermasters served hot tea with milk and sugar, bully beef stew, and bread baked in the field ovens, food superior to what Italian soldiers had received even before capture. The systematic feeding of enemies with proper meals began immediately, though its psychological impact would only be understood later. An Italian officer subsequently testified to the International Red Cross, "We expected brutal treatment as Mussolini had warned. Instead, the British fed us the same rations they ate themselves. The first cup of tea with milk I was offered by a British sergeant made me question everything I had been told." The ships carrying POWs to detention camps provided further education in British propriety. These vessels, navigating dangerous Mediterranean waters under constant threat of Axis attack, transported thousands of Italian prisoners monthly to camps in Palestine, Egypt, and eventually the United Kingdom. Naval records confirmed that prisoner rations aboard these ships matched standard crew provisions. Approximately 3,000 calories daily, including bread, meat, vegetables, and tea, served 3 times daily with milk and sugar when available. Most remarkably, documented accounts confirm that Sunday dinner traditions were maintained even at sea. The HMS Devonshire's log from July 1941 records serving Sunday roast to Italian prisoners using the ship's galley facilities. For men who had been told the British were starving under blockade, the abundance of a proper Sunday meal in the middle of a war zone contradicted foundational fascist claims. When ships docked at Alexandria and later Liverpool, Italian POWs encountered a Britain that fascist propaganda had declared fictional. The port of Liverpool, despite regular Luftwaffe bombing, processed more supplies daily than major Italian ports managed weekly. Military procurement records from 1941 show British supply officers allocating identical ration portions for prisoners and guards. 14 ounces of meat weekly, 8 ounces of sugar, 2 ounces of tea, 8 ounces of cheese, 8 ounces of jam. The journey inland to camps provided further realization. Unlike the overcrowded transports many had expected, Italian POWs travelled on regular British trains with reserved carriages. British Army regulations stipulated hot meals for journeys exceeding 6 hours. Documented menus from 1941 show stews, bread and tea served on these transports. POWs discovered this wasn't special treatment, but standard British military procedure, reflecting a society where orderliness and decency continued despite the existential threat of war. For Italians raised on stories of British callousness, the shock of receiving a warm cup of tea from an enemy sergeant created cognitive dissonance that no propaganda could repair. The steam rising from that first offered cup began dissolving years of fascist indoctrination, one sip at a time. August 1941, HMS Britannia, Mediterranean Sea. Private Marco Rossetti clutched the metal rail as the transport ship pitched in the choppy waters. His stomach lurched not from seasickness, but from the unfathomable reality of what he'd just consumed. Hot tea with milk, 2 spoonfuls of sugar, and a breakfast of porridge with a dollop of strawberry jam. The British sailors called it a proper brew, served in ceramic mugs twice daily with military precision at 0600 and 1600 hours. This simple hot beverage, prepared with care despite wartime scarcity, became the first shock in Rossetti's journey from captured soldier to unwilling witness of British civilization. The Royal Navy transport vessels carrying Italian prisoners to Britain maintained rigorous schedules and standards despite the constant threat of U-boat attack. Ship logs from August 1941 document that HMS Britannia, transporting 654 Italian prisoners, maintained standard naval rations for all aboard, regardless of nationality. 3,200 calories daily, including 6 ounces of meat, 12 ounces of bread, 1 ounce of cheese, 2 ounces of butter, 8 ounces of vegetables, 1 pint of milk, and 2 ounces of sugar. The precision of food allocation reflected British administrative efficiency that many Italians had been told was impossible under the strain of war. They measure everything, Rossetti noted in a letter later intercepted by censors. Even in battle conditions, every man receives exactly the same portion, whether British sailor or Italian prisoner. The tea comes at the same time each day, always hot, always with milk. It is as if Neptune himself could not disrupt their schedule. What astounded the Italians most wasn't merely the food's regularity, but its quality during wartime. Naval records confirm that despite severe rationing in Britain itself, ships maintained supply priorities that preserved core elements of British dietary customs. The ritual of tea, properly brewed, served with milk, continued despite dairy shortages that limited British civilians to 2 ounces of butter and 8 ounces of cheese weekly. This dedication to maintaining normalcy through food traditions, even while fighting for national survival, became a profound lesson in British character. The 14-day journey from Alexandria to Liverpool exposed Italian prisoners to a maritime routine that demolished fascist caricatures. Breakfast at 0700, porridge with milk and sugar, bread with margarine and jam, tea. Lunch at 1200, meat stew with vegetables, potatoes, bread, tea. Dinner at 1800, corned beef, beans or potatoes, bread, tea. This steady rhythm of nourishment, 3,200 calories daily according to naval records, stood in stark contrast to the 2,100 calories Italian soldiers typically received on active duty. Most revealing was the equitable distribution. Officers and enlisted men, British and Italians, received identical rations. "The food lacks the art of Italian cuisine," Rossetti wrote home, but arrives with mathematical certainty. There is no favoritism, no special treatment for officers. Their democracy extends even to food. Landing in Liverpool introduced further cognitive dissonance. Despite 37 consecutive nights of Luftwaffe bombing during the recent May Blitz, the port operated with remarkable efficiency. Italian POWs, expecting a nation on the brink of collapse, instead witnessed dockers unloading American supplies, processing 75,000 tons weekly despite bombing damage still visible throughout the city. The resilience contradicted everything fascist newspapers had reported about Britain's imminent starvation under blockade. The rail journey to detention camps deepened this education. British railways, operating under wartime restrictions, nonetheless maintained passenger service standards that impressed even POWs from affluent northern Italian regions. Camp-bound Italians travelled in regular third-class carriages rather than cattle cars. For journeys exceeding 6 hours, army regulations mandated hot meal service, tea in enamel mugs, sandwiches with corned beef or cheese, and occasionally fruit, apples or pears from British orchards. British civilian rationing became apparent during these transports as prisoners observed ration books being checked at station canteens. The orderly acceptance of limited portions by British citizens, butter, 2 Oz weekly, meat, 1 shilling 2 pence worth weekly, sugar, 8 Oz weekly, cheese, 2 Oz weekly, demonstrated a collective discipline that contradicted fascist propaganda about British societal chaos. More shocking was learning these rations, though restricted, exceeded what many Italian civilians received by 1941. Arrival at permanent camps throughout Britain completed this initial education in British order and fairness. Camp Featherstone in Northumberland, typical of POW facilities, provided accommodations that met Geneva Convention requirements with characteristic British thoroughness. Heated barracks with proper beds and blankets, washrooms with hot water, and critically, 3 meals daily served in a dedicated mess hall. The menu rotation reflected British practicality: porridge for breakfast, stew, potatoes and vegetables for lunch, bread, cheese and tea for supper. Simple fare, yet delivered with absolute consistency. "They have no passion in their cooking," one Italian prisoner from Naples wrote home, "but remarkable dependability. One feels their entire civilization is like this, less artistic than ours, but more reliable." The greatest revelation came when prisoners observed British guards eating identical meals. The absence of separate officers' messes or quality differentials between guard and prisoner rations contradicted hierarchical structures familiar to Italians. This democratic approach to food extended even to tea quality, the same leaves brewed for all ranks. While bland by Italian standards, this equality of provision represented a worldview fundamentally different from fascist principles. As 1941's autumn approached, these initial impressions of British fairness would be reinforced by the most profound cultural revelation yet: the sacred Sunday ritual that not even war could disrupt. The impending first experience of proper Sunday roast would transform curiosity into admiration, setting the stage for a deeper understanding between captors and captured, united by humanity's most fundamental connection: breaking bread together. October 1941. Camp Featherstone, Northumberland. The Italian prisoners gathered in the mess hall, drawn by unfamiliar aromas wafting through the compound. The calendar on the wall marked Sunday, a day they had quickly learned held special significance in British culture. Before them, on metal trays, sat something that transcended mere sustenance: a complete Sunday roast. Golden brown slices of beef rested beside perfectly crisp potatoes, with Yorkshire puddings rising like small edible bowls. Pools of thick gravy waited to be ladled over the ensemble, while bright green vegetables provided colour to the arrangement. This wasn't simply food, this was cultural ritual made edible. "We eat this every Sunday," explained Corporal Jenkins, the mess supervisor. "War or no war, Sunday dinner remains Sunday dinner." This weekly tradition, maintained even under wartime rationing, became the centerpiece of Italian prisoners' re-education about British character. The Sunday roast represented more than nutrition. It embodied continuity, family, and civilized values persisting despite global conflict. For men raised in Italy's rich culinary tradition, the British devotion to this single meal revealed a culture with different but equally powerful food connections. The British Sunday roast followed strict protocols that fascinated Italian observers. Roast beef emerged as the preferred centerpiece, though lamb, pork, or chicken appeared when beef was scarce. The meat required slow cooking, 3 hours at 325 degrees Celsius, according to kitchen records, producing the distinctive tenderness that even Italian prisoners with sophisticated palates came to appreciate. The accompanying Yorkshire pudding, a mystery to Italian eyes, combined simple ingredients, flour, eggs, milk, into a distinctive accompaniment that captured gravy perfectly. Roast potatoes, parboiled then crisped in hot fat, completed the ensemble alongside seasonal vegetables. Camp records document the standard Sunday allocation, 4 ounces of meat per person, compared to civilian ration of 1 shilling 2 pence worth weekly, 6 ounces of potatoes, 2 ounces of flour for Yorkshire pudding, 4 ounces of vegetables, and 4 fluid ounces of gravy. Despite severe rationing throughout Britain, the War Office maintained these Sunday provisions in POW camps, recognizing their importance to both guards and prisoners. What astounded the Italians most wasn't the food itself, but witnessing British guards and prisoners eating identical meals side by side in the mess hall. This egalitarian approach to dining contradicted everything fascist ideology had taught them about British class rigidity. Here was democracy made tangible through food distribution. Officers received the same portions as enlisted men. Guards ate what prisoners ate. In our army, officers dined separately with better food, noted Private Vittorio Lanza in a letter home that passed through censors. Here, the British captain eats exactly what I eat at a table near mine. This reveals something about their society I had not understood before. British mess sergeants, observing Italian reactions to unfamiliar foods, initiated informal cultural exchanges. Sunday dinners became improvised classrooms where British cooks demonstrated pudding techniques, while Italian prisoners offered suggestions for improving pasta preparations. Camp Featherstone's records note that by December 1941, the mess rotation included a weekly Italian night, where prisoners assisted in preparing pasta dishes using available ingredients. "They overcook everything," lamented former restaurant chef Giuseppe Rinaldi to fellow prisoners. "But they are willing to learn. I showed them that pasta should be al dente, firm to the bite. They actually listened and changed their methods." This culinary dialogue revealed the gulf between cuisines. Italian cooking emphasized fresh ingredients, olive oil, and herbs. British tradition favored slow cooking, animal fats, and subtle seasonings. Yet both cultures shared fundamental appreciation for food as community centerpiece. The Sunday roast, with its ritualistic carving and sharing, paralleled the Italian Sunday dinner in social significance, if not flavor profile. British rationing, which prisoners initially mistook for natural scarcity, emerged as a carefully organized system ensuring fair distribution. Weekly civilian allowances, 8 ounces of sugar, 2 ounces of tea, 8 ounces of fats, limited meat based on price rather than weight, revealed national discipline that contradicted fascist propaganda about British societal breakdown under pressure. The Ministry of Food's campaign, "Food is a weapon of war, don't waste it," demonstrated strategic thinking that impressed Italian officers. Most revealing was the British approach to food shortages. Rather than allowing black markets to flourish, as in parts of Italy, Britain implemented universal rationing where dukes and dockers received identical allocations. The Woolton pie, a vegetable dish named after the Minister of Food, appeared regularly on camp menus, demonstrating British adaptability. Italian prisoners learned that Lord Woolton himself ate this humble dish, a fact that contradicted their expectations of privilege. The Agricultural Production Act transformed British landscapes into production zones. Italian prisoners witnessed formerly decorative gardens converted to vegetable plots, with 1.4 million new allotments established nationwide by 1942. The Dig for Victory campaign mobilized civilians to grow 1.3 million tons of vegetables annually by 1943. Even prison camps maintained vegetable gardens, with Italian prisoners often taking leading roles given their agricultural expertise. Christmas 1941 brought special significance to camp kitchens. Despite severe rationing, the War Office authorized additional provisions for Christmas dinner: 6 ounces of meat per person, extra sugar for puddings, and small beer rations. British guards and Italian prisoners shared this meal together, creating moments of humanity amid global conflict. Preserved letters mention British officers serving Italian prisoners first, a gesture of respect that profoundly affected men expecting harsh treatment. The shared Sunday roasts throughout autumn 1941 laid foundations for understanding that transcended propaganda. As guards and prisoners passed gravy boats across tables, breaking bread together week after week, ideological barriers softened. The simple act of sharing meals, of acknowledging common humanity through food, accomplished what political arguments never could. The transformation had begun, one Yorkshire pudding at a time. Spring 1943, Gloucestershire countryside. Private Marco Bellini knelt in rich English soil, carefully placing potato sections into neat rows. 2 years earlier, he had aimed rifles at British soldiers across North African sands. Now, under the watchful but increasingly relaxed supervision of a single guard, he cultivated food for the British war effort. The transformation from enemy combatant to agricultural labourer reflected desperate British labour shortages and growing trust between captors and captured. "You're doing it properly," the British farmer nodded approvingly. "My son did this before he joined the Navy." The farmer's wife appeared at noon carrying a wicker basket. Inside, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, apples from the orchard, and a thermos of hot tea with milk. She had prepared identical lunches for her husband, the guard, and the 3 Italian prisoners working their land. This simple act of equal provision still surprised Bellini after months on British farms. By mid-1943, approximately 75,000 Italian prisoners worked in British agriculture and food production, their labour essential to a nation where 80,000 farm workers had joined military service. Carefully vetted as non-fascist, these prisoners received greater freedoms than their compatriots confined to camps. Agricultural work permits issued by the War Office allowed selected Italian prisoners to live on farms, with minimal supervision, receiving wages of 1 shilling daily plus room and board, tokens of growing trust between former enemies. The emergence from camp confines provided Italian prisoners unprecedented glimpses into everyday British life under wartime pressures. They witnessed a society maintaining remarkable cohesion despite rationing more severe than anything they had experienced in Italy before capture. British civilian weekly rations by 1943 included just 4 ounces of bacon and ham, 2 ounces of cheese, 2 ounces of tea, 8 ounces of sugar, 2 ounces of butter, 4 ounces of margarine, and meat valued at 1 shilling 2 pence, approximately 1 pound of lower quality cuts. These allocations, though modest, were distributed with rigorous fairness that impressed Italian observers. "The greatest revelation was their orderliness," wrote Sergeant Paolo Garelli in a letter that passed through censors. "Every British person accepts the same rations without complaint or attempts to secure advantages. This discipline explains why they continue fighting despite hardships we thought would break them years ago." Most astonishing to Italian prisoners was observing British families adhering to these restrictions while treating enemies in their midst humanely. The Women's Voluntary Service records document numerous instances of farm families sharing their limited rations with Italian workers. In Hertfordshire, Mrs. Eleanor Winterbottom regularly invited 4 Italian farm workers for Sunday tea, serving her own rationed butter on scones rather than the margarine allocated to prisoners. In Devon, Farmer William Harrington shared his private whiskey ration with an Italian prisoner who had lost his brother in the war, a gesture of humanity that transcended national boundaries. Local newspapers occasionally reported these developing relationships, revealing divided community reactions. The Somerset County Gazette from May 1943 described Mrs. Beatrice Middleton facing criticism from neighbours after inviting Italian prisoners to her daughter's wedding reception. Her reported response, "They are boys far from home, just as my son is somewhere in Italy," captured the emerging perspective that humanised former enemies. This humanisation accelerated as British families received increasingly disturbing news from relatives in Italy. After Mussolini's fall in July 1943 and the subsequent German occupation, reports of Italian civilian suffering reached Britain through Red Cross channels. British farmers often shared these news reports with their Italian workers, creating common cause against Nazism. Military records show increased applications for Italian prisoners to work on farms after Italy's armistice with the Allies in September 1943, reflecting their changing status from enemies to co-belligerents. The psychological transformation of Italian prisoners accelerated through these agricultural experiences. Men who had been told of British cruelty instead witnessed fair treatment during Britain's greatest existential crisis. Prisoners who expected harsh exploitation found themselves receiving wages, adequate food, and increasing freedoms. Farm labourers were permitted to accept dinner invitations from local families, attend church services, and eventually visit village pubs within specified hours, freedoms unimaginable to German prisoners. Most significantly, Italian prisoners discovered they were often eating better than their families in war-torn Italy. By late 1943, following Nazi occupation, Italian civilians faced severe food shortages, with daily caloric intake falling to approximately 1,200 calories in northern regions and below 1,000 in some southern areas. Meanwhile, Italian farm workers in Britain received the agricultural workers' ration of approximately 3,400 calories daily, necessary for physical labour but vastly superior to conditions at home. This realization produced an unexpected phenomenon: Italian prisoners sending food parcels to Italy rather than receiving them. Red Cross records show that by December 1943, Italian prisoners in Britain sent approximately 5,000 parcels monthly to families in Italy, reversing the expected flow of aid. These parcels typically contained tea, sugar, chocolate, cigarettes, and soap, items virtually unobtainable in occupied Italy but available to working prisoners through their wages. The permitted contents of these parcels revealed British pragmatism. War Office regulations from November 1943 allowed prisoners to send home 1 pound of tea or coffee per month, 2 pounds of sugar, 1 pound of chocolate or hard candies, 2 ounces of soap, and cigarettes not exceeding 200 per month. These items represented not just material support, but symbolic evidence contradicting years of fascist propaganda about British barbarism. Local Women's Institute branches often helped prisoners prepare these parcels, demonstrating remarkable generosity toward former enemies. In Yorkshire, WI records document members teaching Italian prisoners to knit socks and gloves for inclusion in family packages. In Wales, the Abergavenny WI organised collection drives for additional items to supplement prisoner packages to Italian families. These collaborative humanitarian efforts created bonds that transcended national divisions. As 1943 ended, the sight of Italian prisoners participating in British harvest festivals symbolised their integration into rural communities. In Kent, farm records mention Italian prisoners joining in traditional hop-picking celebrations. In Herefordshire, Italian workers helped press cider from autumn apples, receiving the customary share given to all farm labourers. These seasonal rituals, maintained despite wartime scarcity, offered Italian prisoners glimpses of a society that valued tradition and community, values that resonated with their own cultural priorities. The approaching Christmas season would transform these developing connections into emotional bonds that neither side had anticipated. The British tradition of Christmas generosity, somehow preserved despite years of hardship, would provide the final evidence that demolished fascist caricatures completely. December 1943. Camp Featherstone, Northumberland. The rich aroma of brandy-soaked fruit, cinnamon and nutmeg permeated the mess hall. In the kitchen, Sergeant Willis carefully lifted the cloth covering a large ceramic bowl. Inside, a dark mixture of dried fruits, breadcrumbs, sweet, sugar and spices had been maturing for weeks. Italian prisoners gathered around, intrigued by the ritual unfolding before them. This was Christmas pudding, a British tradition dating back centuries, now being prepared despite the fourth Christmas of wartime scarcity. "We've been feeding this pudding since November," Sergeant Willis explained, adding another spoonful of precious brandy to the mixture. "My grandmother would say it needs at least 5 weeks to develop proper character." Christmas 1943 marked a profound emotional turning point for Italian prisoners across Britain. The traditional British Christmas dinner, maintained against all logistical challenges, represented the final, irrefutable evidence of a civilization fundamentally different from fascist characterizations. The War Office had authorized special Christmas allocations, 6 ounces of meat per person, compared to the standard 4 ounces. 2 extra ounces of sugar for puddings, dried fruits reserved specifically for Christmas baking, and the rare luxury of brandy for both cooking and modest consumption. Most remarkable to Italian observers was Winston Churchill's direct involvement in Christmas planning. Cabinet minutes from October 1943 recorded the Prime Minister's insistence. "Christmas puddings must be provided for all troops wherever stationed and for prisoners of war in our hands. This tradition will not be abandoned even under present difficulties." That a nation fighting for survival would devote administrative attention to preserving Christmas traditions for both citizens and captive enemies contradicted everything fascist ideology had taught about British moral weakness. The Christmas pudding itself became a symbol of British determination and planning. Each camp's pudding contained ingredients gathered through careful hoarding throughout the year. Dried fruits saved from rations, sugar accumulated through minimal daily sacrifices, sweet reserved from meat allocations. Camp records show Christmas puddings typically containing 1 pound dried fruits, raisins, currants, sultanas, 8 ounces breadcrumbs, 8 ounces sweet, 4 ounces flour, 4 ounces brown sugar, 2 eggs, spices, and 4 ounces brandy, ingredients representing significant sacrifice during rationing. The pudding's traditional preparation involved every member of the camp community stirring the mixture while making a wish, a custom that initially bewildered Italian prisoners but soon engaged them emotionally. Camp logs note Italian participation in this ritual increasing each year, from reluctant observation in 1941 to enthusiastic involvement by 1943. The ceremonial aspects, the stirring, the coin hidden inside for luck, the dramatic serving with flaming brandy, represented precisely the type of tradition-bound ritual that resonated with Italian cultural sensibilities. Christmas dinner served in POW camps followed traditional British sequence: turkey or chicken, rarely beef, reserved for Sunday dinners, roast potatoes, Brussels sprouts, carrots, gravy, and finally, the ceremonial pudding with brandy butter or custard. Red Cross reports confirm that Italian prisoners received identical Christmas meals to their British guards, eaten together in decorated mess halls. The shared celebration created moments of genuine human connection that transcended wartime divisions. "I never expected to enjoy Christmas away from Italy," wrote Corporal Antonio Farina in a letter that passed through censors. Yet there is something profound in how the British maintain their traditions despite years of hardship. The pudding alone required planning since summer. This reveals character I had not understood before. Beyond camp walls, British communities extended Christmas generosity to prisoners working on farms and in local industries. Church records document parish Christmas parties where Italian prisoners received handmade gifts from Women's Institute members, knitted scarves, socks, and gloves. In Northamptonshire, the Wellingborough Rotary Club distributed 120 individual Christmas parcels to Italian prisoners working in local boot factories. Each contained an orange, extraordinarily rare in wartime Britain, homemade biscuits, cigarettes, and small comforts. Most moving were the family invitations. Home Office records show over 5,000 special Christmas Day permits issued for Italian prisoners to dine with British families in 1943. These weren't just farm workers who had established relationships with employers, but included prisoners from camps invited by local families, often those with sons serving in the Mediterranean, who hoped similar kindness might be shown to their boys in Italian captivity. In Devon, Mrs. Elizabeth Harrington hosted 6 Italian prisoners for Christmas dinner, later writing to authorities. They arrived nervous, bearing small carved wooden gifts they'd made in camp. They left singing, having taught our children Italian Christmas songs. How strange to find friendship with those we once feared. Local newspapers occasionally reported these Christmas connections, revealing evolving community attitudes. The Yorkshire Post described Italian prisoners singing traditional carols at a village church service, noting how these young men, so far from home at Christmas, reminded us of universal human bonds that transcend current conflicts. The Lancashire Evening Post reported Italian prisoners at a factory helping British co-workers prepare Christmas decorations from scrap materials. Evidence that goodwill remains possible even in darkest times. The Christmas Day armistice that spontaneously emerged in many communities echoed the famous 1914 Christmas truce of the previous war. Guards relaxed rules, families welcomed strangers, and for a brief period, humanity trumped nationality. Camp records show disciplinary incidents dropped to near zero during Christmas week 1943, as even the most ardent fascists among prisoners found themselves affected by British hospitality. The contrast with conditions in occupied Italy intensified the emotional impact. By December 1943, Italian civilians faced severe food shortages under German occupation. Letters reaching prisoners described Christmas in Italy without traditional panettone, without sufficient bread, without celebration. Meanwhile, Italian prisoners in Britain found themselves enjoying plum pudding, receiving gifts, and experiencing kindness from former enemies. This stark juxtaposition completed the demolition of fascist narratives. As 1943 ended, Camp Featherstone's records noted an unprecedented request: Italian prisoners asking permission to prepare next year's Christmas pudding themselves, volunteering to contribute portions from their own rations to ensure proper ingredients. This simple gesture, enemy prisoners embracing a quintessentially British tradition, represented the complete psychological transformation that food-based cultural exchange had accomplished. The prisoners who gathered around Sergeant Willis stirring Christmas pudding had arrived as convinced fascists. They would leave as witnesses to a different kind of strength, not the strength of conquest and domination that Mussolini glorified, but the resilient strength of a society that could maintain humanity, tradition, and generosity even toward enemies during its darkest hour. May 1947, Naples, Italy. Marco Bellini carefully arranged the roast potatoes around the beef, positioning them precisely as he had learned on an English farm. The Yorkshire puddings had risen perfectly in his mother's old baking tin. His children gathered around the table, eager for the Sunday ritual their father had established after returning from British captivity. Outside, Italy remained marked by war's devastation. Food rationing continued, buildings stood in ruins, but inside this modest apartment, a transformation born in prison camps lived on. In England, Bellini explained to his wide-eyed children as he carved the meat, this meal is sacred. It represents family, continuity, civilization continuing even during the worst times. He poured thick gravy over their plates with ceremonial precision, recreating the ritual he had witnessed hundreds of times as a prisoner. The Sunday roast, transplanted to Italian soil, symbolized the most unexpected outcome of war. Enemy traditions adopted not through force, but through genuine appreciation. Between 1945 and 1946, approximately 400,000 Italian prisoners returned to their homeland. Many, like Bellini, brought more than memories. They carried recipes, cultural practices, and fundamentally altered perspectives. Military debriefing records from the Italian government document widespread reports of humane treatment in British captivity, with food experiences frequently highlighted as evidence contradicting pre-surrender expectations. These returning prisoners encountered an Italy still suffering severe food shortages. Average daily caloric intake in southern Italy remained below 1,500 calories into 1947, with white bread, meat, and sugar in particularly short supply. The contrast with prison camp provisions, which by war's end had included regular meat, steady bread supplies, and weekly desserts, created cognitive dissonance that completed their transformation from fascist soldiers to unwitting Anglophiles. "I returned to find my family had suffered more than I did as a prisoner," testified Lieutenant Paolo Marconi in a 1947 repatriation interview preserved in military archives. "In British camps, we received 3,000 calories daily, tea with milk, meat twice weekly. My family in Milan had survived on polenta and whatever vegetables they could grow in window boxes." This final revelation, that enemies ate better than loyal citizens, demolished any remaining fascist mythology. The physical evidence was undeniable. Medical examinations showed Italian POWs generally returned healthier than when captured. Army records indicate average weight gain of 7.4 pounds among prisoners held in Britain, contrasting sharply with the average 12-pound weight loss among Italian civilians during the same period. Returning prisoners often appeared notably well-nourished compared to families who had endured occupation. Many former prisoners brought final gifts received from British camps, items that became family treasures in resource-starved Italy. Red Cross parcels distributed before repatriation typically contained 4 ounces of tea, 8 ounces of sugar, 2 pounds of powdered milk, chocolate bars, cigarettes, and soap. These ordinary British items achieved near mythical status in post-war Italian households, where tea became ceremonially rationed by the spoonful, and chocolate pieces were broken into tiny portions for special occasions. More significantly, returning prisoners brought changed culinary perspectives that gradually influenced Italian food culture. British-style tea consumption emerged in northern Italian cities, where former prisoners introduced the ritual of afternoon tea with milk. In Milan, the first tea shop opened in 1948, founded by a former prisoner who had worked in an English tea room. In Turin, bakeries began producing approximations of Yorkshire pudding, renamed pudding Inglese, and adapted to Italian tastes with the addition of herbs. The cultural exchange flowed both ways. British tourism to Italy, resuming gradually after 1947, discovered a changed culinary landscape in regions with high concentrations of returned prisoners. In the Lake Como area, local restaurants advertised English Sunday lunch alongside traditional Italian fare. In coastal towns near Naples, cafes offered English tea service at 4 p.m. These adaptations, initially targeting British visitors, became incorporated into local traditions. Most remarkably, personal connections forged through shared meals survived the war's end. British government records document over 1,200 sponsored visits between 1947 and 1950, where Italian former prisoners returned to Britain to visit families who had hosted them during captivity. These visits often centered around shared meals, the same Sunday roasts that had first bridged cultural divides. In Yorkshire, the Harrington family hosted annual reunions for 5 Italian prisoners who had worked their farm, maintaining connections that spanned decades. These enduring relationships expanded into business partnerships as Italy's economy recovered. Agricultural records show British-Italian ventures established by former prisoners and their employers, particularly in food importation. Giuseppe Ferraro, once a prisoner working in Kent orchards, established the first major British apple import business to Italy in 1952. Antonio Vespucci, who had served as a camp cook in Northumberland, opened a chain of Anglo-Italian restaurants across northern Italy, serving both cuisines side by side. The most profound legacy emerged in marriage records. Between 1946 and 1955, British authorities documented approximately 700 marriages between former Italian prisoners and British women they had met during captivity. These unions, often begun through agricultural work placements, created permanent family bonds between former enemies. Their children grew up with dual culinary traditions: pasta and roast beef, espresso and tea with milk, tiramisu and Christmas pudding. When Italians voted in 1946 to abolish the monarchy that had enabled Mussolini's rise, returning prisoners overwhelmingly supported the Republican option. Interviews with former POWs frequently cited British democratic traditions witnessed firsthand as influencing their political evolution. The observation that British royalty received identical ration books to ordinary citizens had particularly impressed men raised under fascism's rigid hierarchies. In kitchens across post-war Italy, small revolutions in cooking methodology reflected British influence. The measuring of ingredients, alien to traditional Italian cooking based on experience and eye, became more common in regions with high concentrations of returned prisoners. British orderliness, first observed in camp kitchens, translated into modified approaches to Italian cuisine. Not better, many former prisoners insisted, but different, representing alternative values of precision alongside Italian emphasis on intuition and creativity. By 1960, as Italy entered its economic miracle period, the former prisoner generation reached positions of influence in business and civic life. Their experiences shaped Italy's enthusiastic embrace of European cooperation, with many citing their personal evolution from nationalism to internationalism as beginning with those first shared meals in British captivity. In Marco Bellini's Naples apartment, the Sunday roast represented this transformed worldview. As he served his children both Yorkshire pudding and local bread, he embodied the war's most constructive legacy. "The British taught me something through their food," he often told friends. "That maintaining civilization doesn't require wealth or perfect circumstances. Just determination to treat others with dignity, even enemies." This lesson came not through lectures, but through the simple act of sharing Sunday dinner across a table, where we discovered our common humanity, one roast potato at a time.